Hey everyone, welcome back. I am so thrilled to have you here for this explainer. Today, we're going to try to untangle one of the most chaotic and incredibly complex events in human history, World War I. From 1914 to 1918, a tangled web of alliances, rapid technological advancements, and massive imperial ambitions completely collapsed the old world order. We're going to unpack exactly how a single, highly localized assassination spiraled out of control into a devastating global conflict, using the source material to guide us every step of the way.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here's our roadmap for today. We're going to hit the spark in the Balkans, the Western Front grind, a truly global war, the Eastern and Ottoman fronts, the final dominoes fall, and finally the Treaty of Versailles.
Starting off with Section 1, the spark in the Balkans, June 28, 1914.
To understand the beginning of this war, we really have to look at Europe's ultimate tinderbox. The Balkans were this volatile patchwork of cultures and religions, all desiring their own independent states. You had these fierce Serbian nationalist dreams, looking to unite with Bosnia to build Yugoslavia, violently clashing against the massive Austro-Hungarian Empire, which had just recently annexed those exact lands. To stop the Austro-Hungarian reforms, assassins targeted Archduke Franz Ferdinand. And you've got to just picture the sheer dark comedy of errors on this timeline. First, a bomb literally bounces off the Archduke's car and blows up the vehicle behind him. Then the assassin swallows old cyanide and jumps into a river to escape. But the river is totally dried up from the summer heat. Astonishingly, the Archduke decides to stay in town to visit the wounded at the hospital. But his driver takes a wrong turn, is told to slowly reverse, and stalls the car directly in front of Gavrilo Princip, one of the original assassins. It's just an incredibly dumb misfortune that literally changed the world forever.
That single, chaotic event triggered Europe's complex alliance system like a massive row of dominoes. So Austria blames Serbia. Serbia's ally, Russia, immediately steps in. Germany, allied to Austria, backs them up and declares war on Russia, and then on France for good measure. To get to France quickly, Germany politely asked Belgium to just step aside. Belgium said absolutely not, Germany invaded anyway, and that brought the mighty British Empire into the fight. In a matter of weeks, the entire continent was at war.
Moving right along to Section 2, the Western Front grind, digging in.
Initially, everyone thought this would be a quick war, but those initial offensives failed spectacularly. The Germans were stopped at the Battle of the Marne near Paris and were forced to retreat. Desperate to outflank each other, both armies quite literally raced to the sea, digging into the earth the whole way. This created the defining feature of the conflict. Trench warfare established a horrific, unyielding system of fortified ditches splitting Western Europe right in half, from the North Sea all the way down to Switzerland. In between was no man's land, a deadly, uncrossable gap sometimes spanning up to 200 meters. Imagine being trapped in this horrific system, enduring hours of deafening artillery barrages causing severe, lifelong PTSD, before being ordered over the top. And going over the top usually meant running directly into heavily defended, relentless machine gun fire.
And this brilliantly illustrates the macro strategies both sides had to adopt to break the stalemate. On the Entente side, meaning Britain and France, they realized they couldn't just break the lines, so they decided to try and outlast Germany by importing an endless supply of men and food from their global empires. On the opposing side, the Central Powers, completely blockaded by the powerful British Navy, were literally starving. So Germany utilized U-boats to sink merchant ships to try and starve Britain in return, while German scientists desperately invented a way to chemically extract nitrogen straight from the air just to keep making gunpowder.
Because the trenches were so impenetrable, we see these terrifying technological escalations happening rapidly. Germany introduced massive, human rights-violating poison gas clouds. Though, it's worth noting, these were highly dependent on wind direction and often blew right back onto their own men. The British then unveiled 18 Mark I land ships, which were the very first tanks. These were incredibly slow-moving metal boxes that utterly terrified the Germans by just driving straight over the trenches. In response, instead of focusing on tanks of their own, the Germans quickly invented anti-tank mines and anti-tank rifles to stop them in their tracks.
Which brings us to Section 3, a truly global war as empires mobilize.
It is absolutely vital to remember that this wasn't just a European conflict. Britain and France essentially treated the entire planet as their strategic resource pool. The scale of this mobilization is staggering. We're talking over 1 million soldiers from India and hundreds of thousands more from Canada, Australia, and African colonies, all shipped across oceans. They were brought in to fight, run at enemy machine gun nests, and tragically die in muddy European trenches thousands of kilometers away from their homes. The bloodshed was truly international.
Let's look at Section 4, the Eastern and Ottoman fronts, a very different war.
Actually, scratch the static trench imagery for a second, because if we shift our focus away from France, the war looked completely different. On the Eastern Front, there were no static trenches. The lines were highly fluid and massive. Russia launched the enormous 450-kilometer-long Brusilov offensive. Yet Russia was so horribly ill-equipped that they were literally sending soldiers into battle without rifles. They were told to just pick one up when a comrade died, leading to a staggering 2 million casualties in a single year. Contrast that sweeping landscape with the Italian front, which was absolute vertical warfare in freezing alpine snow and avalanches, where they fought a whopping 11 battles at the exact same river, barely moving the line an inch.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the sheer diplomatic chaos behind the scenes. It was absolutely absurd. To secure their routes, the British were so desperate for allies against the Ottoman Empire that they promised massive, overlapping chunks of Ottoman territory to everyone. They promised the exact same lands to the Arabs, the Jews, the French, the Russians, the Italians, and of course to the British themselves. It was an absurd web of desperate promises that would have massive, long-lasting future consequences.
Amidst all this global fighting, we must pause to look at this staggering number: 1,500,000. According to the source material, as Ottoman morale crumbled, the leadership used the Armenian population as a scapegoat. The sources explain that, masked as mere relocation, this grim reality involved mass arrests and forced death marches into the Syrian desert completely without food, water, or protection. This resulted in the catastrophic slaughter of an estimated 1.5 million Armenians by 1923. The source material notes that, to this day, in 2026, the Turkish government still refuses to recognize this as a genocide.
Moving on to Section 5, the final dominoes fall, 1917 to 1918.
By 1917, the absolute strain of total war caused these massive empires to begin cracking from the inside out. The most dramatic internal collapse was the Russian exit. Millions of casualties led to severe food shortages, which sparked intense strikes that ousted the Tsar in mere days. Eventually, the communists took over. Leon Trotsky brilliantly tried a strategy he called no war, no peace, literally just telling Germany they were walking away without signing a treaty. Well, it failed spectacularly. Germany immediately advanced, and Russia was forced to sign a devastating deal, losing a third of its population and half of its industry to Germany just to get out.
But as Russia bowed out, the United States stepped in. Germany made some incredibly cocky decisions that finally brought the U.S. into the fight. First, they kept sinking neutral ships, like the Lusitania, which carried American passengers. Second, America had loaned massive amounts of money to the Entente and, frankly, needed them to win to get paid back. But the absolute final straw was the Zimmermann telegram. It's almost unbelievable, but the British intercepted a message from Germany explicitly asking Mexico to attack the U.S. in exchange for American territory. That was the push America needed.
By 1918, the contrast was incredibly stark. The Central Powers were collapsing. Germany tried one massive final spring offensive, but their supplies just completely ran out. The German people were starving, the military was facing mutinies, and a full-scale revolution erupted at home, forcing the Kaiser to flee. On the other side, the Entente was massively reinforced. For every Russian knocked out of the war, 2 fresh American units were arriving in France. The overwhelming arrival of fresh troops and funding meant an exhausted, starving Germany successfully wasted their final resources and had no choice but to surrender.
And finally, Section 6, the Treaty of Versailles, the cost of peace.
Let's move to and see how this builds. The guns finally fell silent on November 11th, but the diplomatic fallout literally reshaped the entire globe. Old empires were essentially Thanos-snapped out of existence. Austria-Hungary was broken into dozens of new, fragmented nations. The Ottoman Empire was entirely partitioned, and Germany's worldwide colonies in Africa and the Pacific were simply divided up among the victorious powers. The map was completely redrawn.
Then came the astronomical financial toll laid squarely on Germany: $33 billion.
The Entente wanted to guarantee Germany could never, ever become a world power again. Along with that massive $33 billion bill, Germany was forced to take full, explicit responsibility for the entire war. They lost 1/8 of their home territory, their army was tightly capped at just 100,000 men, and absolutely no air force and no submarines were allowed. Incredibly harsh restrictions.
So what does this all mean? Which brings us to a final, profound question to consider. Looking at the sheer scale of the destruction and the extreme, crushing punishments laid out in the Treaty of Versailles, did this agreement truly end the global conflict? Or did these uncompromising demands merely hit pause, directly planting the seeds for an inevitable and even more destructive sequel? Thank you so much for joining me to explore this topic. I hope this explainer helped clarify the immense complexities of World War I. Keep learning, and I'll see you next time.